Good Monday evening, everybody. Welcome to Charting with Dan. I'm Dan Murrell. With me, as always, Lon Harris.
How you doing?
I like the Wayne's World intro.
Yeah.
With me, as always, Lon Harris. How you doing, Lon?
Party on, Dan.
Party on, Lon. The Invisible Man partied on this weekend. We talked about the fact that it was tracking to do pretty well. It actually overperformed even the expectations, almost $30 million in box office. We're going to look at that. We're going to look at how it stacks up. Universal's been trying many different approaches with reviving these horror icons.
So many dark universes we've tried.
We will look at how it stacks up against those, and kind of a fun breakdown of, we've done a breakdown of the Blumhouse model before on the show, but I wanted to go a little more in depth, particularly with this, just to break down a little bit about their successes, where some of the costs are, where some of the hidden costs are on a lot of their movies, because they're all $5 to $10 million budgets, but there's some little hidden tricks that it's not hearsay. Jason Blum himself has talked about. We're going to break that down as well, looking at the worldwide and the international box office, and of course this week in New Mutants history. Lots to talk about here on the show, so let's jump right into this weekend's box office. As I mentioned, Invisible Man, number one with $28.2 million over the weekend. It had been tracking in for maybe around 20, so that was an overperformance. It got very good reviews. It got a B+ cinema score, which we talk about the sliding scale in cinema scores. Sometimes that's not so good, but for a horror film, nominally, which this was marketed as largely, not bad for a horror film. Yeah. The audience response on other platforms seemed to be positive, so we will see next week how it holds up. What are the legs like? We've talked about it many times, Lon. The traditional horror film has a very short a lifespan at the box office and usually drops off very quickly. We'll have to see what Invisible Man does.
Yeah, this one I feel like may have a chance of breaking out of just the horror movie fandom audience. It's had some crossover appeal, critically acclaimed, and it's just one of those, I'm not saying it's on the level of a Get Out, but it's one of those type movies that there's a story to go along with the movie. It's very of the moment, it's relevant to conversations going on.
But it doesn't feel like it's pandering or that it's didactic or that it was made to exploit the moment. It just feels very
plugged into the kinds of conversations people are having anyway. Elizabeth Moss having, sort of a cultural moment. So yeah, I feel like this has a chance. Whereas a lot of the other sort of horror films are you're playing to the horror crowd, make or break. This one, I feel like there's enough discussion. It could have a breakout moment.
Well, and it's got the R rating, which we've discussed when we talked about Birds of Prey. It was probably not the best idea to have the R rating there, but I think with Invisible Man, it may actually help to keep the audience on board, because it does sort of send a message that it's not your typical. A lot of the particularly, and this is not always fair. A lot of times, a PG-13 horror film, particularly this time of year, will sort of be seen as a disposable piece of just like, they're in it for the big bang opening and that's it. I think the R rating on this one may also signify like, hey, this is a little more adult skewed, perhaps.
I don't myself really subscribe to this. I think there are a lot of great PG and PG-13 horror films, but a lot of horror fans, they look for the R rating as like, well, this is true horror, as opposed to this is sort of a more mainstream movie they're going to kind of pass off as a horror movie.
I agree. I don't think that it's a fair label, but it is a label.
It is a label. It's out
applied
there in the public's mind.
So we will continue to see how Invisible Man does in the weeks ahead. But I did want to look at how it has done in contrast with the rest of these Universal has tried all manner of methods to relaunch since the 21st century began to relaunch their horror franchises. This is just the latest. So I wanted to look at the box office results. I adjusted these for inflation because we're looking over about the last 10 years. So I wanted to see how it stacks up on a somewhat even playing field. So this is The Invisible Man and The Other Ways. The Thing back in 2011, they tried to do sort of a prequel type film. But if it had been wildly successful, which it wasn't, that they would have made more of those. Then we had The Invisible Man, which is sort of a reimagining of a classic Universal character. 2017's The Mummy, which was an attempt to start an entire new universe.
And it was also like, what if these were action films with horror elements instead of a straight up horror take on it?
I mean, they had a cast picture and everything for all those movies.
No, there was going to be
Frankenstein sets and everything else.
Bride. There was talk of Black Lagoon maybe happening at some point.
And then an attempt back in 2010, 10 years ago, I think in success again, which the movie was not particularly successful, but I think the hope was that this would, before The Mummy, relaunch more of the classic Universal monster universe with The Wolfman, starring Benicio del Toro. And then, of course, Halloween, their most successful. And Universal didn't originally have the rights to Halloween, but they had the rights to distribute. And Blumhouse also was behind this new version of Halloween, the most successful. And again, this is more of it's not necessarily I think it's a relaunch, but it's also a quasi sequel. It's that sort of approach where like, we're sort of restarting it, but we're also building on what came before. It's a hybrid type film. That was the most successful. These are opening weekend numbers, by the way, as I mentioned, adjusted for inflation. But if you look at Invisible Man, Mummy, and Wolfman, if you just look at those numbers, you say like, oh, okay, well, they're pretty equal. They're pretty even. Here's the difference. Wolfman budget, $150 million. Mummy budget, $125 million. Invisible Man budget, $7 million. Yeah.
Well, Invisible Man.
That's the big difference.
If you're going to do a monster movie, Invisible Man, he's not there.
You literally have to pay for one actor and a room.
He's not around, so you can he's over there.
But that's what I loved about the movie so much, was they sold it so well that you never think about that. You never think about the fact that...
He's a presence, even though,
he's absolutely a presence in the film.
He's the McCavity of Universal Monsters.
He's the mystery monster.
He's not there.
Yeah, he's not there.
See what I did there?
Effervescence. Okay. We are going to break down Blumhouse here in just a second and look at how Invisible Man and the other films from Blumhouse that they've released widely here in North America have done. But let's look at the rest of the top 5 first. Call of the Wild had you're going for more of a that's the international number. Sorry, Ryan. Let's go back to the this weekend's top 5 domestic. There we go. Sonic the Hedgehog there, still hanging in there at number 2. Call of the Wild actually had we talked about the opening compared to its budget wasn't particularly amazing last week. It fell less than 50% though in its second week, which for something that's aimed a little bit more at the family market, that's not bad news. Bad Boys for Life though, number 5, outlasted Harley Quinn, Birds of Prey, still there at number 5. I think it dropped less than 30% or less than 40%. It's really hanging in there. It's approaching $200 million. But we talked about this with Dragon Ball Super Broly last year, and My Hero Academia Heroes Rising opens in the top 5, despite the fact that it did not open this weekend. It opened earlier in the week, but it makes the weekend top 5. And Funimation, we talked about the fact that they are trying to expand the anime market here in the United States. And with the second, at least here domestically in North America, this is the second My Hero Academia movie to get a big push release from Funimation. Less than 2 years ago was the first movie that Funimation put out. In just, like I said, under 2 years, they more than doubled the number of theaters they put the film into, and the gross for this second movie, Heroes Rising, has already surpassed what the first My Hero Academia movie made here in North America.
Yeah.
So it looks like, I think largely because of streaming services, largely because of things like Crunchyroll, etc. It looks like, while it is certainly not yet a powerhouse, it looks like the anime market is definitely starting to emerge even more into the mainstream, or at least into mainstream distribution here in North America.
Yeah, I mean, in addition to just the trend of more Americans discovering and liking anime all the time and getting into it, they have some real strong advantages. I mean, the main one being these movies are all based in the same IP as these streaming shows that are more accessible now than ever. I mean, I remember the era when if you wanted to watch a full run of an anime series, it was like an adventure. You had to go find the video.
My friend had stacks of VHS.
It was a quest. You were on a scavenger hunt. And now, first there was, stuff like Crunchyroll. Now even a lot of these shows are coming to Netflix and Hulu. It's easier than ever to get into something like My Hero Academia. So it sort of makes total sense that, there's going to be a lot more people plugged in at the baseline who know the story, know the characters, are going to want to go see this in a movie theater.
Yeah, and even before, the theater shutdown that's still happening in China, but we've talked about it's not just here, is that anime is making inroads in the Chinese market. The push for anime to move out of Japan and even really just out of the niche in other countries, it does really seem to be catching on, and I think it is sort of that effect we see. Everything seems so overwhelming with the amount of material that is available these days, but I think in some markets like anime, the ancillary effect that you're seeing is because of the accessibility, instead of being overloaded, it's focusing people in on these certain things.
I also think for a while, the American industry was like, this is going to be a wealth of IP for us to make our own, remake, to English language versions. And I think we're now starting to see the shift of, that doesn't do as well. Like Netflix still makes their live action Death Notes and Bleach movies or whatever. But I think more and more it's like, well, we could just take this and sell it to Americans. We don't need to put that layer in of remaking it for them to meet their cultural expectations.
Well, after less than a week in theaters, My Hero Academia Heroes Rising is already Funimation's second biggest domestic hit ever, behind Dragon Ball Super Broly. So they're doing a great job getting anime out into the theaters, not just on demand, not just on a streaming service, not just on a specialty service. Inroads into theaters. So, we may see this continue to grow.
I think we will.
As we progress. Lon, let's take a look at the top 5 films internationally. That's every country that's not North America, and see what was number 1 around the globe. Sonic the Hedgehog, the number 1 film outside of North America around the world, $26.8 million. The Invisible Man close behind, pocketing $20.2 million. Then Call of the Wild. The Gentleman. It's weird to see The Gentleman keep popping up, but it's the type of film that rolls out slowly around the world in different markets. And also the fact that the theaters are still shut down in China. There's no news when they will open as well. And we're starting to see theaters close in France. We're starting to see theaters close in Italy. So we see Doolittle and we see The Gentleman and we see other films like this because the market itself is also contracting, hopefully temporarily. But as the crisis grows and expands to North America here, who knows what the true ramification of these theater closures is going to be. But we are seeing a lot of these films now hanging around for 2 or 3 or 4 months, where maybe they might have been pushed out of the marketplace by other movies at this point. Yeah. This is just that ripple effect that we've been discussing about now for several weeks, unfortunately, from the theaters closing. And this seems to be a situation that is not winding down, but that is steadily escalating.
Accelerating.
Yeah. So a scary time, definitely. Just hoping that everybody around the world can figure out a way to contain the virus. Obviously, film going is not the number 1 concern and should not be the number 1 concern.
Washing your hands.
Yes, washing your hands.
Not touching your face.
Yes, that's not touching your face, which is weird because when I'm not on the air, just sit with my hands on my face all the time.
Yeah,
which is
don't do that.
Nah, I should not do that. It's a scary time, and this is a show about movies and money, but obviously keeping an eye on that situation and hoping that it is something that we don't have to discuss for very much longer. So, Lon, we take our domestic numbers here, we take those international numbers, and we get the top 5 movies worldwide. That's every market in the world. And Invisible Man, actually, due to the strength of its debut here in North America, is the number 1 movie in the world, almost $50 million in its opening weekend. Sonic the Hedgehog, though, still number 2, followed by Call of the Wild. There's The Gentleman again, and Bad Boys for Life hanging in there. Outlast Harley Quinn and the Birds of Prey. That's the name I'm calling it now. Harley Quinn and the Birds of Prey. That's what's going to be on the DVD
Mike
box.
Mike Lowry and the Boys of Bad.
Yes, Mike Lowry and the Boys of Bad on the worldwide chart. There they are, number 5, hanging in. That movie is I think it's over almost 400 million or over 400 million. We'll look at the updated number there later on, but that is a movie that is just really clicking still all over the world.
I will also say, going back to that slide for a moment, this is The Invisible Man, a very rare case of me not liking the international poster more than the domestic poster.
Yeah, that one it's tough because I have a and by the way, I have to, we'll get to that after this, but that is on. I picked that one as the international poster because I agree. I like the other one better.
This one's much better.
I picked that one because it says in cinemas February 28th. So I just assume that's the international poster because it sounds smarter.
Yes, we don't say cinemas.
We don't say cinemas because it's in theaters.
Go see it.
Yeah.
Just get her done.
Go see it. Yeah. Coming blank.
Yeah. Just get her done on the bottom of all of our movie posters.
I actually prefer that one myself.
Oh, well.
And I think that one may be around here in North America too, but I only had a couple of different options except for the ones that just had the text on them. Right, so you got to pick and choose sometimes. But Lon, I got called out, and rightfully so. That Parasite poster that I talked about a couple weeks ago was supposed to be a parody.
Oh, it was purposefully funny.
Which I should have.
Parasite was
mea culpa. I should have done a little more research on that. I was just so tickled by it that I just ran with it. But it was
very well done.
In retrospect, and also people, I got some tweets of people sent me the ones that it was based on, and it was when you see those, it was very obvious that it was a direct parody. But to me, I thought Dumbo face over here. I don't know the French comedy poster template. So, but I still think that poster's hilarious, by the way. But I did sort of. I got hoodwinked by it. I'm still going to use it. I'm definitely still going to use it if we talk about Parasite internationally. But yes, so that was sort of an intentional comedy thing. Still funny, but I look like a big old dummy because you got me. You fooled me.
At least we didn't screw up like Stanley Cup finalists from
Not
10
this
years
time.
ago.
Not this time. Although there were some people angry
issue.
that I talked about Thor Ragnarok hitting theaters because that was the Australian date and it didn't come out. And this whole New Mutants history thing, I'm telling you, has been nothing but a bag of trouble for me.
It's a fact-checking disaster.
It's a fact-checking disaster. Lon, let's look at the top per theater, which up until earlier today was Emma again. However, there is playing in one theater in New York. There's a 2K restoration of a film that came out in the Soviet Union in 1985 called Come and See.
Have you ever seen this movie?
I've not, but I was reading about it, and it sounds like I would need to have like a stiff drink or four.
It is a deeply, deeply troubling movie. Like, it's hard for me to conceive. I've never seen this projected like in a theater. I watched it like for a class, like in a library. It's hard for me to imagine how overwhelming it would be to see this movie on a big screen.
Well, just the story behind it. I was reading about it before the show. It's from Belarus.
Yeah.
It was the work on it, production on it began, at least as far as development and getting the script together, in 1977. But they couldn't film it for 7 years because the Soviet censors said like, "Niet."
Yeah, no, it's just
you may
pure.
not make this.
It's just like an injection of like the unbearable horrors of war, like the inhumanity.
Which at that time, I would imagine the Soviet Union perhaps would be a little sensitive about.
I get like it's about horrors that were visited on the local population during World War II. So it's not directly critical of like the Soviet regime, but yes,
but it's still anti-war.
It is very strongly
which the
anti-war.
Soviet bloc at that time was not necessarily known for being hugely anti-war.
For real.
Nor, by the way, was the United States.
And it's just a traumatizing experience. Yeah. I mean, it's brilliantly made. It's a great film, but I never want to watch it again.
Well, it was about 12K in one theater in New York. As I mentioned, there's a 2K restoration playing in New York, so that takes the top per theater for this weekend. So if you're in New York and you want to see a traumatizing Belarusian war movie, come and see.
I don't mean to knock it. It's brilliantly made. But
Go and see.
It is viscerally upsetting.
Yeah. So Lon, I think I might skip that one for now. I want something.
I don't recommend it if you're like. It's like a Saturday and you want something to do.
Lon, I said I wanted to break down Blumhouse a little bit because that's what everyone talks about Blumhouse, the fact that they consistently deliver a film at a low budget. And they have these openings that even if they're not great openings, they're big enough that they start making their money back. And so I wanted to talk about, first of all, how much money they're actually splashing out for all these movies, and then what the return on that may be. Some of this is actual facts and figures that I was able to find. Some of this is a little conjecture for me. So, I'll say right up front, this is not pure, all of this is not pure black and white numbers that I have in front of me. It's sort of pieced together from bits of information from different interviews and news sources that I've read. So this is sort of a conjecture of just like, I think this is the rough idea of what Blumhouse's picture is like as a business and why I think it's really impressive. So what I did was to try to get things on as even a playing field, because Blumhouse has made a lot of movies.
Yes.
A lot of movies. I picked films that were released widely, meaning for the purposes of this, in 1,000 or more theaters here in North America, and also released worldwide. So I had a domestic gross, I had a worldwide gross, and then also the numbers, one of the sites that I use also has estimated home media grosses. Okay. So I also have those numbers where applicable, because I just wanted to get, first of all, just the raw numbers, the raw money coming in, at least from the sources that we could track. And then from there, it gets a little more academic. Mm-hmm. From there, it gets a little more conjecture and trying to figure stuff out. So 47 movies that I tracked that met those criteria. So let's just bring up the graphic and go by it bit by bit. So on those 47 movies, the gross revenue, meaning just the dollars that came in, so this is worldwide box office and the home media, $4.7 billion brought in by those wide release movies from Blumhouse. So that's your gross revenue. That's everything. That's everything. Yeah. So then I wanted to look at what their estimated expenses were. First of all, it's in the red, but look at that number. The reported budgets, $4.7 billion in gross revenue. The reported budgets combined on all those films, $345 million.
Wow.
Combined.
That's pretty good.
So they're bringing in, on a gross revenue basis, over 10 times what they're spending on a production budget. That's insane. That is insane.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's this guys that kind of came in the 90s, like in the 70s and 80s, early days of the horror film as we now think of it. They were always cheap. It was like, put a guy in a mask and give him a knife and he's running through the woods. And like the low budget was like baked into the genre almost. Yeah. And then...
But they made those because they knew they weren't going to make a lot of money.
Right. It was one of those kinds of genres. It was like handmade movies for a niche audience. And that was like kind of the whole nature of the beast. And then, I don't know, I mean, I guess it's like the computer animation era or like even Jaws or whatever changed it.
Yeah.
Suddenly it became about creating these big monster effects and making the atmosphere scary. And they got suddenly expensive like every other kind of mainstream blockbuster movie. And I think that's what Blumhouse has kind of realized and started to execute is like, no, you can make just as good a horror movie, if not better than the expensive versions, with a few people in a few rooms.
You know what I think the difference is? Respect. Respect for the audience. Because if you look at the great horror movies, the people that originate them, your John Carpenters and your Deborah Hills and your Wes Cravens, your Sam Raimis, they were in it because they had respect for the audience. They wanted to scare them and give them a good time. They wanted to entertain them. But I feel like as the genre exploded, you had producers that just saw a quick buck, had no respect for the audience, didn't care if they made a piece of garbage. They knew that they could spend $10 and make $20, and that was it. They didn't care. Yeah. And what I think one of the reasons that Jason Blum and Blumhouse have had such success is I honestly feel, and I don't get a BS feeling in anything that I've read, that this is cynical for him or anyone that is a big name at that company. Like, I think that they respect the horror audience and want, even with limited means, want to deliver a good movie. And I'm not saying that they're all good movies, but I don't see that cynicism that I think was there with a lot of the cigar chompers in the 80s. It's like, I'm spending $15 million on a teenage picture to make 30, and I don't care. Give me whatever grip is free to direct because it just needs to get on the, I don't see that.
Yeah,
I don't see that from
right, and I mean, yeah, I think that if you know the genre and the history of the genre and you love these kinds of movies, like the iconic ones are often the ones that seem the most handmade, the least slick and polished. Like this, the thing that always stands out to me is Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The original, really, part of what makes it scary is it feels like something you found. Yeah. It doesn't feel like a movie that was made to be shown in cineplexes across the country. It feels like this weird handmade...
Like a snuff movie you found in your brother's trunk,
Right, and then if you look at the Platinum Dunes, like the Michael Bay remake of it, it's incredibly slick and polished. It looks like every other big mainstream movie, and it's like, well, it doesn't only not gain something out of that, it actually loses something.
Right.
So I think that's where Blumhouse, like, obviously they're not making things that look like the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. They're making big, good-looking Hollywood films, but I think they retain that feeling of it doesn't need to be a huge blowout. It's something small and intimate can even be more intense.
Yeah. So we've got that over $4 billion. You take out the reported production budgets out of that. So that gets subtracted from that gross. Then you have domestic exhibition. This is where you sort of have to average. So the average, and I looked up a few places, just for the purposes of this, you're guessing that half of your gross, half of your revenue, what you're making domestically, is not going to make it back to you. That goes to the exhibitors, that goes to the theaters, you're getting about half back. So you're knocking about $1.1, almost $1.2 billion off of that gross revenue number from domestic. You get even less back from international exhibition. So they're losing about a little over $1.2 billion because you only get about 40% to 33% depending on how it is. I did 40% for the premises. So you're losing 60% of your money overseas. Only 40% of that is coming back to you. So you're losing that much. And then here's the secret. And again, this is not a secret in the sense that like it's the KFC or Coke recipe in the vault. Yeah. But it's the thing that a lot of people don't factor in. And Jason Blum himself has said this in interviews. Everyone says, how do you get a star like Octavia Spencer or an Ethan Hawke or Jamie Lee Curtis or, whoever?
Moss.
Elizabeth Moss. But every time you're delivering, I mean, even that Halloween 2018 movie had a $10 million budget. Invisible Man has $7 million budget. The Purge had like a $3 million budget. How do you do that? And he said, I get if the way that I work is, the budget. We're very upfront about what the budget is going to be and what the budget's not going to be. If you're not a big name, you're not going to get a huge back end deal on this movie. But if you are, that's how I entice you to be in my movie. You get a back end deal. You get a piece of the pie. Right. So part of the reason that those budgets stay so small, especially with a big star, is they're paying out on the back end, but it's not upfront. It's not on the Wikipedia page under budget because they're paying however much off of a percentage of, if they have good agents, the gross revenue. Right. Because the gross is whatever is on the paper. Before you factor in losses, net. If you ask the accountants at a studio, no movie's ever made money because they don't want to pay that back end out. So it's like, oh, well, yeah, the movie made $300 million at the box office, but we didn't net anything.
Actually took a bath.
So your back end, you don't get any of your participation points because, that's like a reward for how well the movie does. But so I tried to come up with like, what is a reasonable number for what one of these deals might look like? And so I found one that said, it was a report that said that Ethan Hawke's back end deal on The Purge, they said, was about the mid 7 digits. So, like around maybe $7 million is what he got off the back end. So meaning the movie came out, it made its money, and Ethan Hawke gets a percentage of that because he basically says, I'll work for nothing up front, and I'm going to trust that this movie is going to do well, and I'll get a percentage of what's made at the box office.
And this happens with big movies too.
Jack Nicholson made hundreds of millions of dollars off of Batman.
And like RDJ had a little taste, and like Johnny Depp owned a little piece of the Pirates movies. But only you're talking A-list stars in that case.
And the risky thing here is, I think you're pretty confident if you're Jack Nicholson with Batman or you're Robert Downey Jr. at least with maybe not the first Iron Man, but certainly
by the time you're talking about three,
you're going to get some of that money because the movie's going to be a success. Right. You're taking a little bit of a leap of faith if you're an actor on one of these horror movies because you never know, it might not do well. But this is how they keep the budget low. They pay out in the back end. So I wanted to figure out how much are they giving back of those profits, of that gross profit from a potential back end deal. So based on what Ethan Hawke reportedly got for The Purge, it was about 10% of the gross revenue domestically, about 10% of the box office money domestically that the movie came in. So I just this is just a rough estimate again. Yeah. This is where we get super into the ether and who knows. So I estimated, let's say that and there's probably not, let's say there's a 10% participant on every movie that that Blumhouse
which
has
there
made.
Probably is not.
I assure you there's not.
You think of like Escape Room, I don't think that has anybody in it.
No, but then with a Glass or a Split, you probably have more than one participant. Right. So it may even out. So I just averaged, let's say somebody on every one of these movies has a 10% profit participation. So then you're losing about $250 million to your back end deals out. So even though your gross revenue is $4.7 billion, you lose all that money, still potentially you're netting after all that over $1.7 billion again off of $345 million invested. Now there's so many other income streams that are not. First of all, we're not factoring in marketing costs. That would drive that net revenue down because that's additional expenses. We don't know how much every movie costs to market. A movie like Glass is going to cost, or Halloween is going to cost more to market than the first Paranormal Activity potentially, or Escape Room. However, we're also not factoring in what did you get for the TV rights? What did you get internationally to put it out, on to FX or to say I'm going to stream exclusively on Hulu? That's revenue that comes in. We're also not counting the films that did not get released theatrically that they sold to distributors direct to video, because they generally, and Jason Blum has said this, is like, we try to never ever make a movie that we don't think we can sell and make our money back. Or if we're not going to make our money back, we're not going to take a bath. Right. We're going to stay in business. So,
like they do the Into the Dark anthologies. There's a new Blumhouse horror film every month on Hulu.
Yeah, that $1.7 billion net, it could be lower, it could be higher, but I think it's potentially in the ballpark. And again, what I really want to demonstrate here is the fact that by keeping that initial budget low, even with those potential back end deals that they're giving to their stars, they appear to be maybe the most or one of the most profitable production entities
Right.
in Hollywood because they know how to budget smartly. They know how to get stars, but cut them in a way that still leaves some room on the ledgers at the end of the day.
And it's the consistency. It's a consistent strategy that it doesn't necessarily work perfectly every time. Like you're going to have the occasional, fantasy island or something that doesn't connect with audiences, but it works a lot of the time, and it covers your butt, even if in the cases where it doesn't work because you're not spending that much. So you avoid what the other studios get into, which is, well, we're going to have these 2 or 3 massive hits, but they're going to end up paying for all of these misfires and failures and very expensive, stuff that got away from us, like, your Doolittles or your Birds of Prey. Blumhouse isn't doing those.
They're not doing those $300 million
They're not
movies.
taking a bath on a Call of the Wild that they got carried away. The worst disaster is a $7 million, $12 million write-down.
And as far as a brand, and I'm sure there's some other horror fans that would point to, brands inside of the genre to hardcore fans. But I think that Blumhouse has a name, even though not every movie that they make is a home run, that to me feels synonymous with how before, again, the slasher genre got run into the ground, New Line Cinema for a while had that cachet of just like, if it's a New Line horror movie, then it's probably going to be pretty good because they put out some hits right in a row, and they did eventually run into the ground.
I definitely think, the back end strategy was obviously more important. I mean, it's still important, but more important for Blumhouse in the early days when they didn't have cachet yet.
Yeah.
And so if you wanted people to go see The Purge, well, you had to put somebody in it that they recognize, because otherwise it's just another strangers in mass knock on the door and then take the family hostage. I think now, you still want to do big profile things with actors, but they can also kind of start selling things to horror fans more on the strength of it's the Blumhouse brand.
Yeah.
We come out with horror films every time this year,
I mean, I'm sure if Jason Blumhouse, who I'm sure watches the show every week,
he must be a fan.
Would probably look at those numbers and point and say, because he actually interviewed once when I gave him some numbers. He's like, that's not right. But it turns out he didn't count Tooth Fairy, and I did.
Oh.
Because that had by far their highest production. But it's like, you have an average budget of like around $6 million. Like, that's not right. I'm like, well, but I counted Tooth Fairy. He's like, you can't count Tooth Fairy. So he knows these numbers.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm sure he'd probably look at that analysis that I did and laugh, because he knows. But
he definitely knows.
I'm sure he probably knows to the dollar.
Yeah.
But my point being that I think it really is impressive. And we know that Blumhouse produces hits, but I really just wanted to feature like the scale and the degree to which they are doing it, and I think very smartly, is pretty awesome. And I think you're right. One of the big keys is they're not in success. They are not scaling up and up and up and up and up.
Yeah.
They're staying right where they need to, and they're just cashing in.
Yeah.
They're continuing to cash in.
Right, and stay the course. Don't get distracted by, now we got to do it even bigger. Shared universe and all the Blumhouse monsters are going to be. Nope. Just keep consistently coming out with these low budget, big high concept, easy to market horror films, and you keep connecting.
And every once in a while you get an Us that'll do a number, or you'll get a Split or a Glass that'll do those kinds of numbers, but they're still not spilling out $80 million for those things.
Right.
So.
Yeah. We haven't had a Purge movie that is like crazy technology and into the future and whatever. Maybe one day.
So kudos to Blumhouse and Jason Blum. I think, I may not like every one of their movies, but I respect the hell out of what they're doing.
I like a lot of their movies.
And I like a lot of their movies.
Quality is pretty consistent.
I mean, they've produced some amazing movies. And
Upgrade.
There's a few that are just god-awful, but
throwing out
happens to
Upgrade level stuff.
Upgrade
randomly.
And The Gift. And they put out a lot of
lots of
good
stuff.
Yeah. So, Lon, that's our look at Blumhouse. Let's look at the entire world. Domestic first. Let's look at the year domestically. See if there's any movie. Bad Boys for Life there at number 1. Sonic the Hedgehog stays at number 2. Birds of Prey jumps up over Doolittle at number 3. Doolittle down to 4. Call of the Wild jumps in at the 5th spot. That bumps The Gentleman down 1. And then Invisible Man enters the chart at number 7.
Wow.
Jumps right into that top 10 list above another Blumhouse, I believe. Another Blumhouse release. Fantasy Island there at number 8. That climbed up 1. Like a Boss drops down 2. We got The Grudge there at number 10. And then The Photograph, after just 1 week on the chart, Lon, has dropped off the chart. Goodbye, Photograph. we
It'll
won't be
have
able
a
to look at this photograph.
second
anymore.
life on streaming services.
Yeah.
I'm sure people will find.
I'm sure people will find
Yeah.
it. Let's look at the 2020 worldwide list. There's a little bit of movement on that as well this week. Bad Boys for Life. Sonic the Hedgehog jumps up to number 2 for the year. Wow. As I mentioned, Bad Boys for Life has eclipsed $400 million worldwide. Doolittle drops to number 3, followed by Birds of Prey and The Gentlemen Staying Where They Are. Call of the Wild jumps up 4 spots. Tanhaji, Tolo Tolo, and The Grudge all drop down 1. Then we have The Invisible Man jumping into the top 10 there at the number 10 spot. And then Underwater. 7 weeks on the list. Underwater drops off the top 10 for 2020. Again, not the chart that I think a lot of people would have anticipated this time of the year, but the real world intrudes sometimes.
There it is, yeah.
There it is, and that is a developing story. We will see what happens with the release dates. Mulan is the next big one that everyone's keeping their eye on. Yeah. I mean, I think if you ask most people now, and just looking at how it is today, I think it's probably looking very unlikely that not only will that Mulan will open in China, but I think that Mulan may open in many countries around the world.
Yeah, I think by now we were sort of hoping the story would already have kind of started to, we could see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Containment and
quite the opposite.
Yeah, so I think Mulan now, at least as far as the industry goes financially, is the next big worldwide release, probably because Disney had dated it almost everywhere in the world, day and date. We're going to see what happens with that. Lon, we are also continuing our countdown to New Mutants. There's been clips. Clips are hitting the internet.
Yeah, no, if I didn't know better, I would fully believe this movie's coming out in 33 days.
If I wasn't convinced that this is a massive prank orchestrated by Bob Iger as a farewell present, I would also say I was almost convinced that this movie was coming out. But as of right now, New Mutants is still slated to hit theaters in just under a month, 33 days.
We got a new clip?
New clip coming out. Yeah. There's posters. I'm sure we're going to start seeing TV spots, I think, pretty soon.
If this is a hoax, they're taking it very far.
They're taking it very far. So 33 days away, and Lon, this is a very special week. This is something that we have referred to many, many times over the years on the air. This week in New Mutants history, we're going all the way back to September 2017 when our own Joe Starr paid a set visit to Boston to New Mutants. Let's see what was happening when Joe Starr, by the way, the set of the shooting in production film New Mutants. Back on September 10th, 2017.
We're still sitting on that footage, huh? There's
somewhere.
There's a reel of Joe hanging out on the set.
Just mere days before Joe went to Boston, we were all abuzz because there was reported that WB wanted Leo DiCaprio to play the Joker.
Wow.
Joe, remember that?
Yeah, I do. Now that you've said it, I do. I'm just trying to picture DiCaprio playing that role now.
That was a story for a hot minute.
Wow.
Then It hit theaters. The first It. We've had a whole other second one since then, breaking a bunch of horror records. The day before Joe went, The Shape of Water won the Golden Lion in Venice. So Shape of Water hadn't even won. We've had, two more? We had Shape of Water, and then we had Green Book, and then we had Parasite. We've had two more
several
winners.
Best Picture winners since this.
And then, as I mentioned there, on September 10th, Joe Starr visited the New Mutants set in Boston for what I assume was a fun set where we had a bunch of things we can't use about Game of Thrones.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, who knows? It's lost. It's lost to history.
We can't. If we do ever play it, we cannot reshoot or redub anything.
It's all fidget spinner themed.
All fidget spinner themed.
Set visit.
Just 2 days later, Apple unveiled the iPhone 10.
Yeah.
Well, now there's like two more cameras on it than there were on that one. I think there's been 2 other ones. And then on September 13th, Lon, all of us Los Angelinos began planning our summer vacations for 2028 to get out of town for the 2028 Olympic Games, which are now just 8 short years away. But Paris and LA were named the host cities for 2024 and 2028 for the Olympic Games.
We don't have the infrastructure for that.
Oh, no. I'm going to be as far away from the city
already
as you
can't get around.
No. It's going to be
it's a nightmare.
I don't think anyone will actually move. I think you just park your car wherever you stop on the 101, and then that's where you stay. That's your Airbnb.
If you're not competing, don't come.
Don't come. That's all I got to say about that. So it's think about everything that's happened since then.
So much has happened, and yet
and yet still that set visit is under embargo.
Maybe
the world's longest embargo.
it may all be over in a month.
It may be. We're 33 days away from finding out if this is actually going to happen.
I can't wait. I just want to see that video.
I do too. I'm very anxious to see it. Lon, some films hitting theaters this weekend. Onward, Pixar's latest. You can find a review for that movie right here on Fandom Entertainment. I put that out last week. Onward hits theaters. We'll see if it dethrones Invisible Man. I think it's likely that it may, but we'll also see how hard it bites into Sonic. Sonic sort of had the family market cornered a little bit over these last few weeks. See how it bites into Sonic.
Yeah, it definitely seems like it'll shift interest over that.
Yeah, we'll see. The Way Back with Ben Affleck, reteaming with his accountant director, Gavin O'Connor, for The Way Back from WB.
Sports drama.
Yeah.
Basketball.
Not to be confused with The Way Back.
Coach. Right. No, that's very different.
Yeah.
This one's like he's a drunk, but then he coaches the basketball team.
Yeah. Every time I see The Way Back, though, I think for a minute that it's The Way Back, which is... whatever. Movies are weird.
Close enough.
Emma is, after in wide release, it's been expanding slowly, but it gets a wide expansion this weekend, so you can see that. And then a really interesting story in limited release. Apple has this movie, The Banker, which was supposed to be a big, splashy award season. True
story. Anthony Mackie, Samuel L. Jackson.
But there were some allegations involving one of the real-life figures involved in the film.
It's actually the son of the man that the movie's about.
Yeah. So that was actually scuttled very last minute. It had been scheduled, I think, to close the Los Angeles Film Festival.
It was basically Apple's first attempt to do an awards season. Like maybe we can get some nominations for this film.
Yeah,
they canceled all of that and sort of pushed it to now to kind of wait for the story to.
So pushed from award season into limited release this weekend. The Banker.
Yeah, it'll be on Apple TV Plus in a few weeks.
Yeah, exactly. You can see it on Apple TV Plus if you have that. I don't know anyone who does, but if you have it, you could watch it. You have it? Oh, yeah. How is it?
I mean, you can get it for free for a year if you buy an Apple product. So if you just happen to have a phone in your hand. There's good stuff on it. I really like Little America, that anthology that Kumail and Emily Gordon did. I was just watching this weekend the Mystic Quest Raven's Banquet, which is the It's Always Sunny creators.
Oh, okay.
It's like a workplace comedy about they make like a World of Warcraft type game, but it's written by Charlie Day and Rob McElhaney and Megan Gantz. It's fun. There isn't a single thing on Apple TV Plus that I'm like, you must get Apple TV Plus so you can see this brilliant show. But there's a lot of things that I'm like, okay.
All right.
Yeah.
No, there you go. Ringing endorsement from Lon on...
It's not terrible. They're working on it. It's pretty good. That one C with Jason Momoa is very silly.
Is it? Yeah, it looked kind of silly.
They're all blind in the future.
Yeah. Lon, before we left,
sorry.
Yeah, exactly. They're
all blind in the future, guys. See, Jason Momoa is in it.
Elevator pitch. There was a little bit of sad news, I think, particularly to people like you and I who were developing our film taste at a certain time. Sure. James Lipton, who, if you haven't seen it, hosted a show called Inside the Actors Studio, which was on Bravo when I was growing up. Passed away today. First of all, I was shocked to find out 93 did not look like or had the energy of a man 20 years younger.
Yeah, it's really remarkable. I mean, that show hasn't been on in a few years. I feel like he'd been out of
it's on, but it's now he's not hosting. It's a different host.
I haven't seen him in a few years. He's kind of stepped away, but this still means he was in his mid 80s, late 80s when he was hosting that show, and you'd never know. Very vibrant, lively.
If you haven't seen Inside the Actors Studio, it really was. I've talked about folks like Roger Ebert and Gene Siskel, Leonard Maltin. A few years ago, when Robert Osborne passed away, also there were people in a, believe it or not, pre-internet era who, if you were someone like me and not in a major population center, sort of toward the middle of the country, there were these people who were conduits to a deeper understanding of film, whether that's through criticism or with Robert Osborne, it was just sort of this very comforting informational presence of introducing a lot of times these classics on Turner Classic Movies that I'd never seen. And he would, and tell you about all of these different things. And for me, James Lipton and Inside the Actors Studio, it was this idea of, you don't necessarily, you didn't even have DVDs and special features and stuff, so you don't even get to see necessarily these interviews with these stars where they're looking back on their careers and talking about the craft, or Spielberg is on there talking about the making and the craft of a movie. And this was such a conduit for how movies not just work on a sprockets way, but how they work emotionally and how the people that make them are emotionally involved with them.
Yeah, I think for me the importance, and I devoured this show when I was a kid. I used to watch it all the time. I think the importance of guys, especially, I mean, you mentioned Ebert. And Robert Osborne and of course James Lipton. They were taking movies seriously. There wasn't. I was in a major sort of metropolitan area growing up, but my parents and my friends, they weren't taking movies seriously the way I do. Movies were a fun, silly, disposable thing. All right, you've watched your movie. Get back to your homework. That's the important stuff. And when you would watch Inside the Actors Studio, here was a guy who lived and breathed movies. He knew all of these performances. He could cite scenes. He could quote dialogue. It was about being a fan on that sort of analytical, thoughtful, deep level. And that was my only exposure to that as a kid. And you could do this.
And that was, honestly, it was the first time that I realized that, there were people that I could see and I could realize that, if I could figure out a way to do it, they're not just these disposable things,
right?
That you could be, and a lot of the spirit of what I enjoy doing here every week on charting and on SJU and reviews is really out of a feeling of homage and gratitude and almost wanting to just sort of pay it forward, because these obviously the artists and the people that make movies, they are the writers, they are the authors of these works, but there's just such a to be able to turn on TV or read a big Ebert book or a big thick Leonard Maltin book and realize that there were people out there that could also watch movies and help you find them or contextualize them or understand them, and that was something that was not only tolerated by some people but respected, that was a possibility for a life or a career, was just such a meaningful thing.
Yeah, nobody on that show ever asked a question that gets told, you're looking too deep into it. It's it's
just a movie.
Right. Yeah. It's let's engage on those ideas. Let's talk that out, and let's talk to this person who made this thing you love about what their insight was. And it was just seeing a whole room of adults take these things seriously, even comedies, even dumb movies. And that was very meaningful for me as a kid, because I thought movies are just a stupid, fun, dumb thing that you do, and then you get back to training to be a contract lawyer.
So one of the things that sort of sucks about, sort of advancing and getting older is that you do lose people that you look up to as kids, whether they're members of your family or whether they're people that were aspirational for you, that were inspiring figures for you. James Lipton was one of those for me. Just the idea of someone devoted to film and who loved it so much that they devoted their life to bringing that understanding to others, I thought was incredible. So James Lipton, certainly I never had the chance, but if I had, I would have thanked him for everything that he did to bring his love of film. It was contagious and it was infectious, because it certainly bit me that much harder to know all of those things about movies. So as we leave today, I found in just a little clip and a little glimpse that I think that just joy and enthusiasm that he had, that so many people were drawn to. James Lipton and all those who preceded him and all those who have followed in his footsteps and are blazing their own trails, thank you. And we will see you here next week on Charting with Dan. Thanks for watching.
If the show has any secret, that's it. They don't know what's coming next. I don't know what's coming next. And that's the thrill of it. And I go on that stage with them, and the people that I've been on the stage with. It isn't their celebrity that excites me. It's what might happen between us. And when things go awry and all those 400 blue cards avail me nothing because they've gone off in a brand new direction, I'm the happiest man in New York.
And finally, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
See, Jim, you were wrong. I exist, but you may come in anyway.